You are standing in a room full of people who know your name, they laugh at your jokes, they remember your birthday, and somehow behind your eyes there is this quiet, persistent feeling that none of them really know you, that you are watching the scene from slightly outside of it, that the person speaking your words and wearing your face is performing something, and the real you is somewhere else entirely, waiting to begin. That feeling has a name, and the reason it never fully goes away is not a flaw. It is a feature, one that was built into you hundreds of thousands of years before you were born. You are not broken, you are ancient, and the distance you feel from your own life is one of the oldest tricks your brain ever learned. Here's where it starts. Your brain is not one thing. It is a collection of systems that evolved at completely different times, bolted together across millions of years of survival pressures, each one optimized for a different environment that no longer exists. The part of your brain that controls your heartbeat evolved long before language. The part that handles fear evolved before abstract thought. The part that tells stories, the part that creates the character called you, that one is extraordinarily new. And it came late to a party that had already been going on for a very long time. In the 1960s, neuroscientist Paul MacLean proposed what he called the triune brain model. The names he gave the layers have since been updated, but the core insight remains striking. You are not one mind, you are a hierarchy of minds. And the newest layer, the one doing the narrating, the one reading these words, is sitting on top of systems it did not design and often cannot control. Your heart races before you know you are afraid. Your stomach drops before your thoughts can explain why. Your hands reach for food you did not consciously decide to eat. That is not a glitch. That is the older brain acting before the newer one can interfere. And when you notice that gap, the moment between impulse and awareness, you are glimpsing the scene between two very different versions of yourself. That gap is where the strangeness lives. Psychologist Michael Gazzaniga spent decades studying patients whose left and right hemispheres had been surgically separated, a procedure done to treat severe epilepsy. What he found unsettled everything. When the right hand did something the left brain did not control, the left brain, the verbal narrating side, did not say, "I don't know." It made up a story, instantly, convincingly, and it believed that story completely. He called this the interpreter. It is the mechanism your left hemisphere uses to turn the chaos of your competing internal systems into a single coherent narrative about who you are and why you do what you do. And here is the part that changes things. The interpreter is always running. Right now, it is assembling a version of you in real time. And that version is not the truth. It is the best available story. You are not experiencing your life. You are constructing it. Constantly. From the inside. This is not a modern problem. Your ancestors on the savannah had the same architecture. They too woke up some mornings feeling out of place, moving through routines that felt mechanical, watching themselves interact with their tribe and wondering, even without words for it, whether this was all there was. The difference is that they did not have time to sit with that feeling. There was food to find. There was danger to outrun. There was a fire to keep burning. The relentlessness of survival left very little room for the interpreter to turn inward and start questioning its own output. You have that room. And so the interpreter does what it always does. It narrates, it questions, it looks for coherence. And when it cannot find it, when the gap between what you are doing and what you feel like you are appears too wide, it produces the sensation of strangeness. The feeling that your life is happening to someone slightly different from you. Developmental psychologist Dan Siegel calls this the narrative self, the story your brain builds about who you are, where you came from, and where you are going. That story is not a luxury, it is a survival tool. Humans who could narrate their own experience, who could say, yesterday I did this and it went badly, so today I will do that differently, had an enormous advantage. The narrative self is the engine of planning, of learning, of anticipating threats before they arrive. But there is a cost. The narrative self is always in the past. It is always working from memory, from pattern, from the last version of you that it successfully assembled. When your life changes faster than the story can update, when you move cities, change careers, lose someone, or simply grow in a direction your old story did not predict, the narrative self lags behind. And in that lag, you feel it. The strangeness, the quiet sense that you are a character in someone else's script. There is also something else happening, something even older. Your brain, at its core, is a prediction machine. This is not metaphor. Neuroscientist Carl Friston has spent years developing what he calls the free energy principle, the idea that the brain's primary function is not to perceive the world but to predict it, and then to update those predictions based on what actually arrives. Every moment your brain is generating a model of what is about to happen, what you will see, hear, feel, taste, and then it compares the prediction to the reality. When the predictions match, everything flows. Life feels smooth, natural, embodied. When they do not match, when reality keeps arriving differently from what was expected, the system registers what Friston calls prediction error. And chronic prediction error, in a life that keeps shifting, in a world that keeps accelerating, in a body that keeps changing, that feels like disconnection, that feels like being a stranger. Your brain predicted a version of your life, and your life stopped matching the prediction. This is why the feeling tends to spike at transitions. A new job that should feel exciting but feels hollow. A relationship that looks right from the outside but feels unfamiliar from within. An achievement you worked years toward that, on the day it arrives, produces not satisfaction but a strange quiet. The interpreter was expecting a different arrival, and when it gets this one instead, it pauses. And in that pause, you feel the gap. You feel yourself as a character rather than as a person. The Stoics had a word for this. They called it prosoche, a form of attention turned inward, a practice of watching oneself from a slight remove in order to act with more intention. Marcus Aurelius described it in his private journals as the practice of observing your own mind the way a scientist observes a natural phenomenon, without judgment, without panic, just looking. He was not describing pathology. He was describing a tool. The strangeness in his framework was not a sign that something was wrong. It was the beginning of something honest. What he understood, what the neuroscience now confirms, is that the gap between the observer and the observed is not a problem to be solved. It is the architecture of consciousness itself. You feel like a stranger in your own life because you are always, in some sense, outside of it. Narrating, predicting, constructing, comparing. The question is not how to close the gap. The question is what to do inside it. The answer that keeps emerging from the research is deceptively simple. The feeling of strangeness decreases not when you find the real you. There is no static real you waiting to be discovered, but when the story you are telling about yourself starts to match the life you are actually living. When the narrative catches up to the behavior, when the predictions update to match the reality. That is not a passive process. It requires doing the thing and then updating the story, not the other way around, not waiting to feel like yourself before acting. Acting and then revising who you thought you were. Your ancestors knew this without knowing they knew it. They did not wait to feel ready. They moved toward the mammoth, or they did not eat. They joined the group around the fire, or they froze alone. The identity came from the action. The self was not something they found. It was something they built again and again, With every choice the old brain made and the new brain narrated, you are doing the same thing, right now. Even reading this, the interpreter is watching, it is taking notes, it is deciding how this moment fits into the story of who you are. And the beautiful, uncomfortable truth is that you are not finding out who you are deciding, narrating, constructing every single day. The next time you walk into a room and feel like a stranger watching yourself from the outside, remember this. That distance is your consciousness doing its job. That gap is where awareness lives. And you have been crossing it your whole life without quite realizing it was the most human thing about you. You are not a stranger in your life. You are the one telling the story, and the story is not finished yet.